In late March, a Senate inquiry into the potential health effects of wind turbines drew to a close. Wind-powered energy is central to Australia's commitment to the Renewable Energy Target Scheme. But as I found, the outcome of the inquiry has the potential to derail both the country's green ambitions and the clean image of the wind industry worldwide. In the rural Victorian town of Waubra, 150 kilometres from Melbourne, Spanish wind turbine manufacturer Acciona has built the largest wind farm in the Southern Hemisphere. In September 2009, the farm's 128 turbines purred to life to the delight of locals, who marvelled that the latest technology in the renewable energy sector was in their very own backyards.
When the Chellicum Hills wind farm started, I loaded my wife and kids into the car. We went and stood under a turbine, and I even said to my kids, "This is the way of the future. These things are fantastic." So when Waubra was proposed, we thought, well, we were never going to get any, but the hills around us were all going to have turbines on them. What could possibly go wrong?
But before the novelty had even worn off, an insidious sickness characterised by headaches, nausea and heart palpitations emerged in a few residents, one of whom was sheep farmer Donald Thomas.
These were problems like headaches and sort of a feeling, seasick type feeling, as you'd stand in their yard talking to them. You're not looking at the turbines or anything. You can't even hear the turbines. But you'd walk away from there. Well, as I drove away, I would have had a pretty hard job to prove I wasn't intoxicated.
Mr. Thomas also said his elderly mother's sleep apnea has significantly deteriorated since the turbines are switched on. Tricia Kent, Acciona's Director of Communications, is hoping the Senate inquiry will bring an end to these as yet unfounded accusations that are beginning to take their toll on the wind industry.
We think it's unfortunate that there has been some debate generated by some anti-wind activists and really based on no evidence and certainly no peer-reviewed scientific or medical evidence.
Not all residents complain that the turbines are making them sick. Some, like Steve and Trish Coleman, are just sick of the noise.
These things are going 24 hours a day. They're not shutting down like a factory at 5 or 6 o'clock at night. And they keep us awake or wake us up in the middle of the night. So therefore, it's not a very safe workplace that I end up working in the next day.
In late November last year, the newly elected Liberal government imposed stringent new regulations on proposed wind farms. These included a minimum setback of 2 kilometres between any turbine and dwelling. Only 600 metres separates the Coleman's house from the nearest turbine, and while they lament being the guinea pigs for wind farming in Australia, they agree with the Liberals' new proposal. MP Greg Barber, however, believes that the new proposals go too far.
So we have a renewable energy target that would see the amount of renewable energy in Victoria and Australia grow by almost fourfold over the coming 10 years. Now, if that target is going to drive the development of wind farms in Australia, if the Liberals in Victoria keep going the way they are, then you'll see a line of wind farms at the South Australian border, because we won't have them in Victoria. The target will be met in other states.
Councillor David Clark stood as mayor during the planning stages of the Waubra wind farm. He welcomed the development into the district and remains supportive of its renewable energy contributions today.
We're in a situation where we're 800 metres away from the nearest turbine, and we can hear the noise in our backyard. We certainly can hear it in our house probably once, maybe twice a month. It's fairly rare that we hear it in the house, but it doesn't bother us and doesn't bother our young children.
What would be an ideal result to come from the Senate inquiry?
To get a national wind farm standard for noise. We don't have a standard in Australia. We use different ones in every state, and I don't think that's good enough for the amount of development that we're talking about in this country.
Lexi Cotty, Newsline.
Thanks, Lexi. Still to come on Newsline, the latest in business, sport and weather. Plus, we take a look at why housing is so expensive and the new fitness craze sweeping Melbourne, CrossFit.
Welcome back, and coming up on Newsline, are fixed-wheel bicycles too dangerous for Melbourne streets, and the latest in business, sport and weather.
But first, Whether you're renting or buying, there is little relief in sight for house hunters, with Melbourne's house prices in particular going through the roof. And as I found, with our population steadily climbing, the challenge for state and federal governments is how to increase the supply of affordable housing.
Housing, we all need it, but fewer people are able to realise their dream of owning their own home.
What we've seen in Australia now is very consistent house price inflation over many decades. So in other words, the price of housing is increasing over and above the rate of inflation.
In 2009, the National Housing Supply Council suggested that Victoria had a shortage of 22,700 homes, which is a lot, which is why prices have gone up so much.
44 suburbs now have an average price of $1 million. That's projected to rise to 100 by the end of 2014, with 400 suburbs to top the $1 million mark within 20 years. Exacerbating this problem is the fact that the biggest rise in house prices is being felt in suburbs that used to be cheap. Last year alone, house prices in Melbourne rose by more than 20%.
Considering, 10, 11 years ago when I first started selling in this area here, with 140,000 you can buy a house, and now you can't buy that same house for under 620. What we found, particularly our area being 8 kilometres from the city, generally we were a first home buyer market. Certainly probably over the last 2-3 years we've seen the change where they can no longer afford a property in the area.
This is pushing more low and moderate income home buyers out into Melbourne's fringe. These bare paddocks will soon house nearly 8,000 people.
The answer to affordability and supply is just not more homes on the city's fringe. That's part of the equation. But the other part is, medium and high-rise developments around existing town centres.
Continued detached, low-density land development and housing development on the fringe is not the way to go, because the infrastructure is simply not there to support those people living in those locations.
But with a lack of investment in the supply of affordable housing, there's no end in sight.
Supply has not kept up with demand in the housing market, and we see the shortfall of around 200,000 dwellings. That's according to the National Housing Supply Council. The problem is the shortfall is only expected to increase in the future.
According to Tony Dalton, changes to our tax system could at least improve the rental market.
Owner-occupied housing, for instance, is exempt from capital gains tax. This is an anomaly within the Australian taxation system, and what it does is encourage overinvestment in housing by people who are well off. So we need to think about that, effectively that subsidy going into the private rental market, how it might be better directed and linked to housing that is then accessible and affordable by low and moderate income households.
The federal government's solution, 19,000 new social housing dwellings, as well as a new incentive scheme aimed at increasing private and not-for-profit investment in the supply of affordable housing.
NRAS took some time to get started. There's no doubt it took a while for investors and the state governments and local councils to actually understand its operation and get investors interested, and I expect that the 50,000 dwellings will be taken up in the near future.
The Victorian government is also trying to meet the overwhelming demand for housing with a high-density development here at Fisherman's Bend. 250 hectares has been earmarked for tens of thousands of residents.
We're in the process of reforming that precinct structure plan situation so that we can get land to market quicker.
But not everyone is optimistic about the result.
Every government that we've had in Victoria in the last 20 years has really had the same plan for Melbourne, which is, to go out a bit and to go up a bit. And each time a new government comes in, they trash the last government's vision, but the core of it is really about the same. So, they've said they're committed to improving affordability by increasing supply, and now comes a challenge for them to do it.
Sergio Macklin, Newsline.